Hi, I'm torrin, greathouse, and I'm so excited to be joining Poems That Changed Me to share a little this week about a poem that's been really important to me in my journey as a poet and as a thinker. So when I think about poems that have changed me both as a person and a writer, they're often poems that in some way transgress, right? That push the boundaries of what a poem seemed to me in that moment capable of doing. Poems that make me rethink poetry. So when Dean first asked me to contribute to this series, I struggled between a handful of poems, but ultimately settled on one of the first poems that gave me this feeling of poetry's potential unfolding before me, somehow larger than before. A poem that I return to often, reciting the lines to myself under my breath as if it were a prayer. Um, and the central irony of that will appear soon. Psalm 3 by Allen Ginsberg. To God, to illuminate all men, beginning with Skid Row, let Occidental and Washington be transformed into a higher place, the plaza of eternity. Illuminate the welders and shipyards with the brilliance of their torches. Let the crane operator lift up his arms for joy. Let elevators creak and speak, ascending and descending in awe. Let the mercy of the flower's direction beckon in the eye. Let the straight flower bespeak its purpose in straightness, to seek the light. Let the crooked flower bespeak its purpose in crookedness, to seek the light. Let the crookedness and straightness bespeak the light. Let Puget Sound be a blast of light. I feed on your name like a cockroach on a crumb. This cockroach is whole. Immediately noticeable in this poem is the way that beginning in the second line, Ginsberg mobilizes the imperative mode, delivering instructions to God. In a scant 11 lines, he opens with the command let 8 times and illuminate once. Only 2 lines in the poem don't begin with an imperative delivery. This mode dominates the poem's scope, an effect further enhanced by Ginsberg's adherence to the end stopped line, creating an almost antagonistic tone structurally. Even the opening line's punctuation builds upon this, with a colon and 2 periods, truncating the statement rather than maybe a more quotidian approach using commas to break up the sentence and more readily convey its meaning. Yet, in the poem's final line, I feed on your name like a cockroach on a crumb. This cockroach is holy. The tone is suddenly reshaped into one of reverence. What could earlier have been read as commands now seems imploring, an act of prostration before the poem's God. While Ginsberg's series of psalm poems each conglomerated various elements of several religious psalms, this poem on some level feels more deeply tied to the psalm form, contains more psalminess than other poems in this sequence, particularly the kind of mechanics of the sung prayer. In fact, the imperatives within this poem seem to be a direct reference to the language of the biblical Psalm 3. The turn that happens between arise, Lord, deliver me, my God, strike all my enemies on the jaw, break the teeth of the wicked, into from the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. seems to mirror that turn of the final line in Ginsberg's version of the third psalm. Though perhaps this repetition of let bears its origin from a different psalm, Psalm 130, or the De Profundis, recited as part of the liturgy for the Jewish high holidays, and containing the line, "Let Israel hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is mercy, and with him is plenteous redemption." I think maybe from here, and with the commonality of the De Profundis in Jewish religious practice, you can trace the origin of that let repeated again and again through Ginsberg's Psalm 3. While I could talk about this poem all day, I want to at least attempt to keep this a little concise. So I'll just touch briefly on some other things I love in this poem, like Ginsberg's attentiveness to sound, his brilliant slant rhyming of bespeak and to seek, a rhyme so nice he in this poem in fact wrote it twice. The way that certain sounds carry straightness to seek carries both the T and the S forward, and you get this kind of happening throughout the poem. Once again, I could go way deeper into this, and I'm trying to make myself not. The poem's subtle gesturing to a queer politic with the figures of the straight and crooked flower, as well as to a class politic, with the poem itself calling for God to first illuminate the homeless and working class, or the penultimate line of the poem's near apocalyptic vision. Let Puget Sound become a blast of light. Given that this poem was written near the height of the Cold War, that blast of light he describes is nearly impossible to imagine as anything but the blast from an atomic bomb, even if it's not intended that way. There's a chime here. All of that aside, this poem has been deeply important to me, and I think that that's because, as a closeted queer and trans teenager, raised at the intersection of my family's cultural Christianity and my mother's practice of Celtic witchcraft, there was something in Ginsberg's vision of spirituality as a gay atheist Jew and then convert to Zen Buddhism that spoke to me deeply, that allowed me to imagine a version of divinity, of holiness, of God that wasn't hostile to me. And every time I reread it, that final line reminds me, no matter how unwanted I was or am, that I might still imagine myself like a cockroach, unkillable and holy.